What I've been focused on as State Farm's first Chief Diversity Officer since my announcement in early June. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of diversity and inclusion in the workspace. Talk about moving from interested to committed when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and then share a little bit about State Farm's D&I journey along the way, and then pause for some questions. Um, the first thing I want to do, though, while you read my bio, Jason, I appreciate that. At State Farm, we've created a couple of years ago a really unique way for us to introduce ourselves to one another and to groups that maybe don't know us as well. It's called I Am Who I Am, and it is an outgrowth of our D&I journey that allows us to kind of see past the surface level and this the kind of professional veneer that's appropriate and well placed, but kind of moving past that and getting to know people at a deeper level. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to share my I Am Who I Am story, and hopefully it gives a little more color and context to the comments that I'll share with you today. I am Victor Terry. I grew up a free lunch kid in a single parent household in Birmingham, Alabama. I do not have a sense of shame about that, but rather a sense of pride because I know how far I've come. I am the oldest of three, and my baby sister works for State Farm. I am the product of an initiative to further integration in Birmingham City schools by way of school busing from the 4th grade through the 12th grade. It took me 2 school buses and about 1.5 hours to get to school every day for most of my childhood. Despite a less than privileged set of circumstances growing up, I was surrounded and raised by loving maternal and paternal extended families. My 2 grandmothers, who passed away in 2018 and 2019, and the lives that they led were examples of unfailing love, sacrifice, and dedication to family. They rooted me in the idea of having the right principles, showing grace, working hard, and having the right amount of pride in self. Through them, I've been given a sense of all that is truly important in life. And every day I strive to extend these elements to my wife, Therese, who I've known since the 6th grade, my 2 amazing daughters, Malia and Morgan, my siblings, Corey and Crystal, friends, and colleagues. I've had more mentors than I can count, and I've been fortunate to be invited into the lives of many people from whom I've learned a great deal. My Christian faith has brought me through several personal peaks and valleys, and I'm immeasurably grateful to have a career at State Farm, an organization that has continued to allow me the opportunity to earn the trust and confidence to serve others at a high level. I am a Samford University graduate, but I yell Roll Tide on the weekends with my family, and we did a lot of Roll Tide yelling this past Saturday. I am Victor Alexander Terry. I am who I am. Now, that introduction that I just went through is something that I mentioned we've had for a couple years now, but it's really kind of picked up in its attention and engagement from almost all of our leaders and several thousands of our associates. It's proven to be a really good platform as we have enhanced our D&I conversations within the walls of our organization. We believe it drives better understanding of one another. It helps us identify in ways that go beyond our primary ways of identifying when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So gender, race, ethnicity, et cetera, age. And it just generally sparks great conversation. And the first time that I read that to a really broad group for the organization was a couple of weeks after my announcement in early June. And the number of emails that I got as a result of that, either people who said, hey, you know what, I was a free lunch kid too, or I grew up in a single parent family, or hey, I'm from Alabama, or I, attended a magnet school or alternative high school, and I was a product of school busing. The ways of connecting with one another through that platform, I think has served us well. And it's something that you might think about in your organizations or your nonprofit organizations that you're connected to as a way to gain more traction when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I've been mentioning several times this morning that my announcement took place in early June. It was actually June 9th. And if you can think back that far, it seems a long time ago, we were literally at a real point of climax this summer. This was after the horrid killing of George Floyd. This was after Ahmaud Arbery had been shot while jogging in his neighborhood, and after the Breonna Taylor incident. All of this was taking place while we were all, basically locked in our homes, not going very many places, and staring at the TV when we weren't, talking to a screen with other people on the other side. And it was a really peak moment for our society, and a peak moment really for us at State Farm as well. But what it did is it put a spotlight on issues around social justice and racial equality that have been present for quite some time. These are not new issues, and my guess is 100% of you already are aware of that. But the fact that we were all at home, we were all sheltering in place, and we were all paying attention in a way that I'm not quite sure the nation and quite frankly, the world had been paying attention in a way that really created a new way of sparking these conversations and engaging in these issues of social justice and racial equality. Now, while my announcement was June 9th, many of you work for organizations. I'm sure you've switched jobs at some point. You have an announcement day and then you have an effective date. Well, my effective date was July 25th, but I always kid when I'm talking to State Farm audiences that no one at State Farm really cares about that. As soon as that email goes out with your name listed on it and whatever your new responsibilities are, you get pulled in pretty quickly. And that certainly was the case for me. And since that time, I've really been going out of my way to learn more about what it means to be a practitioner as a Chief Diversity Officer. And so as you hear me share my I am who I am story, I like to say tongue in cheek, I've been living diversity and inclusion my whole life. I've had a passion for this my entire professional career, and I've been a very active volunteer leader in this space without the title in a visible way, easily, I would say, for the last 10 years. But that is not enough to really be effective in these kinds of roles going forward. While passion matters and commitment matters, there is a science to this work, and there's a bit of an art to this work that do quite a bit to affect your level of success, depending on where an organization may be in their D&I journey, or a nonprofit organization. My guess is many of you are associated with nonprofits, and you may be thinking about this conversation within that context. And so exposing yourself, me exposing myself to experts and expert practitioners, the mental models, the models that are available and methodologies really have done a lot to get me to the place where I can really begin to measure my effectiveness. The other thing I would say is coming into this role, while the moment that I described that happened this summer, acutely focused on social justice issues within the African American community, me and my role, and at State Farm as a whole, I really go out of my way to remind our constituents that D&I, spans across a wide spectrum. It's not just race or ethnicity or gender. We also consider things like age and ability and sexual orientation, veteran status, even geographically where you may be from, all have important elements. And the concept of intersectionality really makes us who we are. And it's the fullness of who we are in that intersectionality, that when we have those conversations about those things and then connect them to what our imperatives are, which I'll get to in just a second, that's when we really fully realize our maturity when it comes into this D&I space. I want to transition now to talk really briefly about the evolution of D&I in the workspace and really how it came to be. And the precipice of that was Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1974, which, if you know anything about your history, it was a landmark civil rights and labor law that made it illegal for employers to discriminate based on race or ethnicity, national origin, gender, or religion. And it literally changed the face of the workplace, particularly as the demographics of our nation became more diverse over time. Really what it meant over the last 50 plus years since that law has taken effect is that employers that did discriminate essentially would miss out on a larger talent pool, which effectively hurts their business in the long run. And over that last 50 or so years, some companies have gotten this. They have taken on the things they need to take on to ensure that they don't discriminate based on those elements that I mentioned before. And there are some organizations that haven't gotten it. And those who haven't gotten it or have engaged in behavior that is in conflict with that law, they saw lawsuits, and lawsuits tend to turn into bad public relations and bad PR, and bad PR tends to translate into losing customers. And you all are all intelligent enough to know when you lose customers, ultimately you lose revenue. And that becomes kind of a moment of reckoning for organizations. And they have to ask themselves, what are they willing to do to kind of right their ship and get back on the track of not discriminating against people based on those elements so that they can run a healthy and a thriving business. Now, the subtitle of this talk was moving from interested to committed. And this is an important element to me because diversity is something that you can do by making sure you have a great mix of people across a broad spectrum of all those elements that I mentioned before: gender, race, ethnicity, age, ability, sexual orientation. But to really move from interested to committed, it takes a skill set. And inclusion, a lot of people would argue in this space, is, if not more important, just as important as the diversity element. And some would argue more difficult. Some global practitioners will tell you inclusion is a skill set, not just an attitude. It's not just something you think about and agree with. It is something that you actually do. And so moving from interested to committed looks like committing resources and time and energy to acknowledge differences and embrace those differences. But the most important part is turning those differences into value, to create value through those differences so that you can get more discretionary effort out of employees within your organization or volunteers in your nonprofit. It allows you to figure out how you are meeting the needs of your customers or constituents. And it's through that diversity, it's through that inclusion that those best ideas come to the surface. You are able to develop better solutions, be more creative and more innovative in order to develop those solutions. Now, it's through my exposure and study of this work that I really came across 4 imperatives when it comes to D&I that I believe are critical as you move from being interested to committed. And they're simple, but they're still rather profound. The first imperative is the moral imperative. And very simply, that's just about doing the right thing. The second imperative is the legal imperative, and that connects right back to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But the third imperative and the fourth imperative are the ones that I think that if we latch on to, gives all organizations and nonprofits the ability to really make the kind of pick up the kind of ground that they would like to have and have the kind of success that they deserve to have. That's the talent imperative and the business imperative. And so the talent imperative I spoke to a little bit already. It's not enough just to have diverse people around your business conference room or whatever the case may be. It's the inclusion of those individuals and their ability to contribute. And then it's the essence of belonging. Once you know your contributions are valued, that does something unique to an individual in terms of them wanting to give the best of themselves to your organization. And it's through that discretionary effort that businesses really begin to see the advantages of diversity and inclusion and belonging. I have a belief, most people go to work and they want to do a good job, right? Very few people wake up in the morning and say, you know, I'm going to go to my job, or I'm going to, you know, participate in this activity with my nonprofit, and, you know, I'm just going to show up and I'm just going to be lousy when I get there. Very few people do that. Most people want to do a good job. Now, how we define good job is certainly across a pretty wide spectrum, but just doing a good job generally is not enough to move the needle in a business context. It's discretionary effort that I believe really makes the difference, and it's unlocking that discretionary effort through inclusion and acknowledging our differences and turning those differences into a value creation element, which is really important to us. And then the fourth thing would be the business element. And so when you get that discretionary effort, I talked about more creativity, more innovation, better solutions, quicker to market, really being able to unlock key elements of the market that you may not have access to, because people are involved, they feel included, and they have a greater sense of belonging. Now, with that in mind, you know, I think it's important for me to highlight that an individual's experiences within the workplace obviously make a difference here. And so organizations have to work really hard in order to create that inclusiveness that I've mentioned. And they also have to work really hard to ensure that there's equity. Now, equity is something that I believe is coming more to the forefront within the context of this D&I discussion. In fact, a lot of times you will hear the term DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm guessing there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different definitions of what that means. What I tend to think about when it comes to equity, a lot of people, and rightfully so, tend to think about outcomes when it comes to D&I. So what percentage of people are we hiring from diverse backgrounds? What percentage of people of different races or ethnicities are flowing through our talent pipeline or in leadership or executive positions? And I think that is appropriately placed, and we measure things that are important, and we should measure those. But really, to affect those, to only focus on the outcome, I think is a mistake. I think there's a lack of sustainability and a shelf life that just doesn't get to where you want to be as an organization or as a nonprofit. What I tend to think about in terms of equity is equity in opportunities to develop, so that people can then compete for those opportunities, either to be hired or to matriculate through a talent pipeline and to be in a leadership or an executive position if they so desire. And if they even don't want to be in leadership, they can always be a lead worker and be a leader amongst peers. And that equity within development focuses on the unique needs that each individual has. It doesn't have a one size fit all for everyone that wants to compete. My needs may be different from Jason's needs. In focusing on Jason's needs gives him the opportunity to compete. It gives me the opportunity to compete. You level that playing field. And then you kind of go from there in terms of figuring out who's the right candidate for that leadership or executive opportunity. But it's through that approach that I think equity really lives, and it allows the outcomes that we so often focus on when it comes to these D&I topics to get to where it needs to be and really have the kind of sustainability that's worthwhile. The last thing I want to mention here, and then I want to pause and really interact with you all and take your questions, is just share a little bit about what State Farm is doing. Now, despite my coming into this role in a formal way this summer, being relatively new, the D&I journey for State Farm is not new. We've had an Office of D&I really since the early 2000s and have done a lot in terms of establishing multiple employee resource groups. We've participated in a lot of research. We've earned several awards through the years that really has served us well. But in 2018, a few things started to happen at that point, and since then, that has really escalated us down this D&I maturity journey, if you will. In 2018, our president, chairman, and CEO, Michael Tipsord, signed the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And this is the largest CEO-driven business commitment to advance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. That was really a jumping off point for us taking that next step into being a even more mature D&I organization. Coming off of that, this year, I mentioned the peak moment we were at this summer with the horrific killing of George Floyd, where our president, chairman, CEO offered what I described as an unapologetic and unambiguous message to all of our associates about, his displeasure, what he was seeing playing out in society, the hate, the distrust, the racism, and calling on all State Farm associates to do their part to be a beacon of good, not just within our walls, but really in society as a whole. And that was a real measurable point for us as an organization. I had not yet quite seen a senior executive message that sharp, that pointed, and even use the word racism. I don't know if I'd ever seen a memo or saw a video cut by a leader that actually used the word. And it really opened up the doors for many of our associates to feel free to talk about these issues and really acknowledge that they exist, and then ask ourselves, what do we want to do about it within the context of State Farm? And how do we continue to be a beacon of good outside of State Farm? Within that same message that I mentioned, Michael made a commitment to pledge $1 million to the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. I had not been announced yet, but he made a commitment to appointing a chief diversity officer, which happened the following week. And since that time, there have been a couple other things that we've done, and I won't go through all of these, but one in particular, a couple of weeks ago on October 7th, we had a virtual event, much like we're having today, called Conversations Worth Having. And within that event, it was a 5-person leadership panel where each of those individuals shared their personal stories about experiencing social injustice, about experiencing racism. And many of these stories were very much topical and present day. They weren't like decades ago when they were, coming up in grade school. They were like last summer, and some of them in Bloomington, Illinois. And what it really allowed for was really vulnerable and transparent conversations from some of our leaders about their own experiences. And then we transitioned into what other leaders can do to be a part of the solution, to help State Farm become more inclusive as an organization, and how they can help their associates in having more of these conversations. So again, that we can take these differences that we have and create value for them so that we ultimately drive the organization forward. The other thing that we've done is, we're still refining our process on how we use our corporate voice more. My guess is many of your organizations did that this summer as they spoke out about the killings of George Floyd in particular, and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. We did that this summer, and we continue to refine and reflect on, how do we do that in the right set of circumstances so that, our constituents, our customers know that those issues are important to us. And the last couple of things I would say here as I wrap up and then maybe open it up, Jason, for any questions is everything I've talked about so far is really connected to those 2 elements that I mentioned as it relates to those 4 imperatives, the talent imperative and the business imperative. D&I is a growth strategy. Yes, it's the right thing to do. Yes, there are legal implications for discrimination, but if you see it as a growth strategy, regardless of, how you identify, regardless of where you may fall on a social political scale, if you tie it back to whatever organization you've said yes to, or whatever nonprofit that you've said yes to, and see it as a growth strategy, I think we can find commonality in that. That gives us the energy and motivation that we need, and more importantly, the success factor and the sustainability factor that's so important to us. There was a recent Brookings Institution report, this came out maybe about a month and a half ago, that shared that more than 50% of the US population today is millennial and younger. So if you think about everybody in the United States, more than half of that group is millennial and younger. And half of that group identifies as a racial or ethnic minority. That is, those 2 facts are something that no organization can run from. It's going to continue to grow. And that part of the population and those individuals in particular care deeply about this subject, as they do many other societal subjects. And these are people that, if they are not our customers today, they will be in the not too distant future. Again, connecting it back to that growth strategy element. And as we talk about those four imperatives, at least at State Farm, we think about them within the context of workplace, marketplace, community, and supplier diversity. And just last week, as it relates to community, State Farm, as a part of a broader effort connected to the Business Roundtable, made a 5-year, $100 million pledge to help level the playing field when it comes to racial equity in support of Black and Latinx small business owners, and also do our part to help facilitate affordable housing for those same communities. And so we're proud to be a part of that, and proud for the State Farm brand to continue to do its part to be a beacon of good in all of our communities, and especially here in Central Illinois. So Jason, I'll come up for air there and see if there's any questions from the group.
All right, got my mic on now. Appreciate your words today, and especially like you opened up to us right in the beginning there. I like that connection that you made by sharing who you are, and not to be afraid just because you might be in this elevated role at work. You're still one of us, and so thank you for establishing that right off the bat, and giving some practical takeaways as well. Definitely, that was going to be my question. And for everybody that's out there, real quick, we unfortunately don't have our chat box working today. So today I'm just going to have you unmute yourself when you do have a question. So be thinking about those right now. But just to share that, while we can put diverse ideas and people in place, it's accepting them into the culture of your work or your community nonprofit. How do you get those implemented? How do you get the people that may not be accepting of those new ideas? And you shared that it's that edge for growth, that's that competitive edge almost. So right away, you answered my question. And so now I want to actually ask others if they have some questions that maybe Victor didn't get to cover today. Again, feel free to unmute, and we'll try to coordinate this as best as we can today.
Hey, Jason, this is Amy Cortese. I don't know if you can hear me okay.
Yes, Amy, go ahead.
Okay, very good. Hi, Victor, and thanks again for spending time with us. I know you are in high demand, me being here at State Farm as well, so cannot thank you enough. A question I had really probably on behalf of the group, and it's something you shared in that meeting you mentioned in early October, which I thought was so helpful. It'd be helpful for all of us, is to talk through just kind of what you shared with us in terms of rules of engagement, or kind of your advice around how to kind of create that foundation for these conversations worth having, because I thought that was so helpful. And for all of us in the situations we might be in, I think part of it is how do we create that environment?
Yeah. Well, I think, I started out, and Jason acknowledged again, me leveraging our I Am Who I Am platform. That, for some people that can be a little uncomfortable at first. It's not something that we are used to do. We are not trained or encouraged to do that quite a bit within the professional context. And it doesn't have to be that it's, while it was certainly transparent and vulnerable, the structure in which I put it together has some formality to it. It doesn't really have to be that formal. It can just be as simple as, sharing a little bit about who we are and where we're from, and looking for those commonalities, really to set the stage and establish a platform for how that conversation goes from there. As I listen to a lot of my colleagues over the last several months, people who say, hey, I want to be a part of the solution. I want to help advance D&I topics, but I'm not sure where to start. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm not an expert. I haven't had to deal with, a lot of stereotypes in my life or bias or anything like that. And a couple of things that I tell them. One is you don't have to have all the answers. This really starts with asking well thought out, well intended questions and just listening. And a lot of times you don't even have to have a response for everything that's shared, because sometimes you're still processing what you're hearing. Something as simple as just ask, when you ask a well-intended, well thought out question, just ask people to tell me more, right? And your ability to listen and kind of hear their perspectives and appreciate the lens in which they see the world, draws people a little closer together. And then there's this other really interesting human dynamic that I learned a long time ago. The more you get people to talk about themselves, the more they like you. It's the weirdest thing ever. You can engage in a half-hour conversation and have maybe 3 minutes worth of dialogue yourself. But if you get that other person to share more about themselves, to listen to their stories, to ask follow-up questions, to dig a little deeper, to acknowledge what they said, they walk away thinking you're the greatest person on earth, simply because you've listened to them. Well, the reason for that is a fundamental need that most people have is simply to be heard. Not for you to have all the answers or to come up with the solution, or maybe you don't even have a committed action right off the bat, but simply listening and allowing people to feel heard, I think sets the stage for a lot of good things to happen, Amy.
That's great. That's so helpful, Victor. Thank you.
You bet.
Hey, Victor, this is Heather Blevins. I just had a quick question for you. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Heather. How are you today?
I'm doing great. First of all, once again, want to echo Amy and Jason's comments. This has been a really good conversation, especially for our CPCU group to have. But just wanted to kind of pick your brain here for a minute and ask you, what books are you reading about these particular topics, or what thought leaders might you be paying attention to, especially just because there's so much buzz and talk about this right now, and especially for a group like us and in the industry and the insurance industry in general. What would you recommend for us to be able to kind of immerse ourselves in so that we can gain better understanding to have those types of conversations that Amy was talking about?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I would tell you, there are a lot of resources out there available to you. I think first it starts with understanding the issue. So before you jump into what do I need to do, or what steps do I need to take? There's a lot that you can expose yourself to in the areas of social justice, equality, equity, across every dimension, whether it be race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, age, and really a simple Google search brings up dozens and dozens of resources that you can expose yourself to. Some of them are short articles, some of them are books. Some of them may be documentaries or movies, whatever the case may be. So I think starting with, understanding the issue is important before you don't want to kind of transition too soon. But I just picked up, to answer your question, I just picked up a book called How to Be an Inclusive Leader. It was recommended to me by a colleague of mine who read it and thought it was really good. I haven't started that yet, but I've got that one on my desk along with several other books that I'm into right now that aren't necessarily D&I related, but certainly are proving to be helpful to me as I transition into this new role. The other I would tell you, Korn Ferry is an organization that we work quite a bit with at State Farm. Some of you may be familiar with them. They have a lot of resources that are free on their site that speak quite a bit to advancing diversity and inclusion within a private organization. McKinsey has a lot of work out there. You can go to their website. Most of these consulting firms or think tanks have very much in-depth white papers that really go beyond the surface level in terms of explaining what good looks like, what a proper D&I maturity path looks like, and what good leaders look like when they operate effectively in this space. So Korn Ferry is a favorite place of mine, and there's an individual there who who I'm working with closely right now. His name is Andreas Tapia. He's really a global expert practitioner when it comes to D&I. So I'm spending a lot of time with him, just learning the best of what he's already figured out. McKinsey is one. And then the third one is one that is really interesting to me. It's called the Neuro Leadership Center. And what they take is really the science of how our brains work when it comes to bias, when it comes to inclusion and belonging. And it helps us first understand ourselves and why we all have bias. Every last one of us has some type of implicit bias. It's that gut reaction we have when we see something or we hear something. We can't help it, but it's understanding why that's there and then knowing how to process it in a way that's more helpful than harmful. And so I read a quote online the other day that I posted on my LinkedIn. It says, "You are not responsible for your first thought, but you are responsible for your second thought, and you are responsible for your actions." And if we think about bias that way, I think it does a couple of things. It lets us off the hook with feeling guilty because we do have bias. And then we move quickly to ownership and accountability with what that second thought is and what that third or what that action is. And so I'm mentioning all this is because that is the kind of work that the Neuro Leadership Center does when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And I've really enjoyed reading a lot of their material.
Thanks so much for that. I think that that's really important for our group to kind of, level set and have expectations of how we can best explore and learn in this particular topic.
You bet.
All right. Any other questions?
Hi, Jason. This is Vicky. I have a question
Sure.
for Victor. Now that we have a diversity and inclusion officer, we've opened the doors for the conversation. What do you see as some potential actions that we might take as an organization in the future for diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you how State Farm is thinking about this, and this could apply to other organizations. So one of the things that I've exposed myself to is a Deloitte maturity model. It's pretty simple. It's not overly complicated, but it really spells out in pretty clear terms where organizations might be along their path. And there's 4 components. The first step of D&I maturity is simple compliance, right? It has to do with an organization or a nonprofit's adherence to the Civil Rights Act that I mentioned earlier, not discriminating based on those primary factors that I shared, and it's responding to those claims when you get them. And that's a really immature way of thinking about D&I, but that is a category that you can be in. The second category is when D&I efforts are led either by a specific diversity and inclusion team or human resources, or it could be some combination of both. And in an organization who is at that particular point of their maturity, really kind of thinks like this: we're all for D&I. That's their job over there. Everybody else just runs the business and we do what we do. And we kind of plug into them when we need something, or maybe they have some programs that are available. And, I go to them when I have time, or if it's of interest to me. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. We have it, it's good, but it doesn't really affect my day to day. That's kind of maturity level number 2. Number 3 is when you have leader-led D&I. That's when it moves out of only being owned and run by HR or a D&I team. And that's when individual leaders see value in the talent imperative and the business imperative, and they begin to operate in a way that demonstrates that. They begin to weave in elements of D&I into their daily business transactions, into their meetings, into their language, their communication. It becomes a part of what they do, but it's primarily at the leader level. And then a full phase 4 of D&I maturity is when it's whole organization, when it's not just leaders, it's all associates, and that it's truly integrated into what an organization does every day. So I lay that out for you because before you can even begin to develop aspirational plans, you kind of need to know where you land on that scale. And so one of the things that I've done as a way to build out the platform we already have, I mentioned our ERGs, and we have a broad group called the Enterprise Diversity and Inclusion Council that sits in every representative sits in each individual department or team. But I've created a smaller senior executive governance council that I've exposed to all elements of D&I within our organization and the best thinking from outside of our walls. And then together with them, we will help determine what that next step for us should be on that D&I journey. And as we move from where we are to where we want to be, what are the practical action-oriented efforts that we can take on? And it's through that collaborative approach that then, Vicki, for State Farm, I'll be able to answer that question of what's next. So what exactly are we going to do? The reason that council is important and the reason that process is important, from day one, I was never naive about, just because I have the title Chief Diversity Officer, it doesn't matter what I think or what ideas I come up with or where I think we need to go if the business doesn't own it, if they don't buy into it, if they don't adopt it, if they don't absorb it. Really, my role is to act as a conscience of the organization, to bring resources to bear through my team, to stay on the leading edge of what makes D&I really work in the organization as a growth strategy, but it lives within the business. And so if it doesn't live in the business, it doesn't matter what I do. And so this governance council is going to be a big part of that, because they will not only help us with that next step, but they will also prepare the organization to take that on before we start to pull together the plans to execute on whatever that next step is.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet.
Hi, Victor. This is Chrisanetta Matthews. And my question kind of tags on to the question that Vicki had right before me. I know you have an enormous responsibility as it relates to your new role, but there's so many different aspects of diversity and inclusion encompassed within this role.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prioritize what and where you're going to focus? Are you looking for small wins? Are you wanting to make an immediate impact? Or you're tackling the big dogs? Well, how do you prioritize like where you go next?
Well, so I appreciate the question. I don't want to assume, but it would be easy to think it's an either or equation. And I don't believe that's true. I believe it's a yes and I believe we have the capability, at least within our organizations, to do multiple things at once. I think we can take on very big, aspirational and lofty goals. And also think there are things around the edges that we can do very easily at the individual department level while those big, lofty, aspirational goals are playing out. And so as I described this governance council that's been formed, we will have a short-term goal. We will establish a short-term goal and say 12 to 18 months, and we will establish a longer-term goal of 18 to 36 months. But the best part of what I've seen so far is I've seen evidence of individual departments within our organization take on for themselves what they believe they need to do more of. It may be they need to get more active in recruiting in order to have a diverse and competitive pool of candidates when they have openings. I'll just pick an area, say actuary. They say, you know what, our actuary department is not as diverse as it deserves to be. We need the best and brightest minds from different perspectives in all elements of diversity. We want to engage with our talent brand specialists and our recruiting arm within HR and figure out what we need to do. They don't need my help with that. They don't need my permission for that. They don't need to come to me and ask if it's okay. I don't necessarily need to plot it out on a grand strategy map. Now we need to know because we want to catalog all the efforts that are going on, but they can run with that on their own. That might be seen as a quick win to use the language that you use, But a more lofty aspirational goal would be developing a way to measure and enhance cultural competence of all of our leaders at State Farm, both existing leaders and those who might be in our talent pipeline. How do we identify cultural competence? How do we measure cultural competence? And how do we enhance cultural competence so that all leaders, both today and of the future, have it, in as much as we measure, develop, and enhance competence around financial literacy or communication or digital transformation or whatever the case may be. I believe that element of cultural competence is as important as anything else, but doing that on an enterprise-wide basis for almost 57,000 associates, not all of those are leaders, but many of them are, that's going to take a little more energy and effort and a lot more structure than an individual department saying, we need to work with recruiting to enhance the competitiveness of our diverse candidate pool. So long story short, I believe we can do both. I believe I have an obligation at an enterprise level, but individual teams can take action as they see fit to advance the ball in their particular department. So with that, Jason, I'm going to begin to wrap up my time here. I want to thank you again for introducing me. I want to thank Ashley Petronik for extending the invitation for me to join you today. It's been a pleasure to be with you all. And I don't know if some of the State Farmers may know, I don't know if everyone knows, I lived in Bloomington prior to coming to Texas where I am right now. I will be making my way back to Bloomington. So I'll be back in Central Illinois sometime in 2021 as we get our new living arrangement settled. And so I look forward to maybe once this pandemic is over, bumping into you into some professional events sometime in the not too distant future. So thanks again, Jason. Appreciate you having me, and hope you enjoy what's left of your meeting.
Appreciate your time with us, Victor. Very well spoken today. Thank you for sharing with us and speaking from the heart. I think that message was heard very loud and clear today. Thank you so much. For my meeting, we are at time now. The one last announcement that I'd like to mention is that the CPCU Society has, let me get this up, has put together another roadshow, and this one was a past presidents panel. It's November 4th, and you can register for that free event. The last three presidents here, and if you might notice at the bottom, we have our own Heather Blevins as the moderator for that event. So especially let people newer in the chapter know about this. They're going to have some great information from some very well talented leaders. So just put that on your calendars. And with that, I will wrap up our meeting today. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much.